Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Philip Newman, Managing Director at Metals Focus, to review performance in 2020 and what investors should be watching in the precious metal space as we head into early 2021. Philip, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
And 2020 was unprecedented in many ways with COVID-19, social activism, and the US elections, among other things. How was the precious metals market impacted? And were there any metals or regions that stuck out specifically?
Gosh, well, how long do you have? I think when we think about the gold price, of course, it's reacted, very strongly. We had record highs earlier this year. We saw investors really flocking into gold as really a very strong safe haven asset, and that benefited silver. We didn't see record highs for silver, but we certainly saw a marked improvement, again, benefiting eventually from that sort of safe haven argument. I think what we've seen more recently, though, we've seen the prices backing off after we had the election result that had that certainty coming out of the US. But I think what's been really interesting over the past couple of weeks, and I think this is a reason why when we're thinking about 2020 and putting in the context of where we see prices next year, the fact we've seen a partial recovery especially over the past week or so, I think that's really helped us as a research house to make sure we've maintained a sort of a bullish focus for 2021.
So what's your outlook for gold in early 2021? Is it largely contingent on the risk on or off environment as we look to the other side of COVID-19? Are there any other factors to consider, like inflation?
I think that's a really good point. So we certainly saw, as the news of the vaccines came out, gold has taken a hit. But then when we think about the partial recoveries we've seen now, I think that's because of the rising expectations of a fiscal stimulus back on the table in the US, and therefore you've seen that the dollar taking a bit of a hit on a trade-weighted basis. So if we sort of now put that into a 2021, I think, when we think about what the equities have done, I do think that even though optimism for the economic recovery is certainly there, understandably, I would also suggest that equities have got ahead of themselves. And therefore that opens up the possibility that we will see a correction. And I think that could therefore be positive for gold. And so I think that idea of the safe haven motive will be strong. But also to your point, which I think I certainly agree with in terms of looking forward and those rising inflationary expectations. Now, of course, inflation is nowhere to be seen. And those expectations are rising from a really low base. So, it's important to put that in context. But, from a gold point of view, I think you do have that twin driver from a professional investment standpoint, the safe haven and the inflationary hedge. And again, I think that's why we do still remain positive for gold next year.
Any other areas in the precious metal space that we should be aware of?
Gosh, well, I think what we're starting to see coming out of the COVID in some areas is a return of some elements of physical demand. We've seen that in India with Diwali and the wedding season. There have been queues outside shops. I think it's been quite a positive development there. I think for next year, as we go into early 2021, I think the Chinese New Year will be a really interesting time. I mean, if you think back to last year, of course, China was the first to suffer with COVID, and that really wiped out Chinese New Year 2020 to all intents and purposes from a gold point of view. And I think it would be really interesting to see how the trade responds, what level of restocking we see there, and just really how strong Chinese demand will be. Of course, overlaying that with gold prices possibly rising, gold prices remaining volatile as well. So I think that would be a really quite interesting mix to look at.
All right, Philip, great to catch up with you as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.